Welcome to our weekly Zoom news conference. I'm Sandy Close, Director of Ethnic Media Services. Today, our topic is President Biden's immigration reform agenda. Expectations are sky high after years of dread. What can we realistically expect in terms of immediate changes and future changes? Ethnic Media Services is deeply honored to have 6 speakers today, each of whom brings unique expertise and life experience to this topic. Because of time considerations, we ask you to enter questions in the chat box. After each speaker, our moderator will select 2 questions. Please stay on the call for an extra 10 to 15 minutes after the hour for a final round of Q&As with our speakers. Let's get right to it. Our speakers include Frank Sherry of America's Voice, Cyrus Mehta, an internationally recognized immigration attorney, Patrice Lawrence of Undocu Black, John C. Yang of Asian Americans Advancing Justice, AAJC, Marielena Incapié of National Immigration Law Center, and Ravi Raghbir of the New Sanctuary Coalition. Thank you so much for being with us today. Thanks also to our conference coordinators, Pilar Marrero, Sunita Sarabji, and Tanu Henry. And to our interpreters, Jackie No in Korean and Oscar Artete in Spanish. Speakers, please speak slowly. I'm turning the conference over to today's moderator, Sunita Sarabji.
Thank you, Sandy, and good morning to all of you. It's wonderful to see so many people on this very important briefing. And we'll start out with Mr. Sherry of America's Voice. Reporters, please put your questions in the chat box. I will pick 2 questions after each speaker, and we'll go from there. Mr. Sherry, welcome.
Thank you very much. And thanks to Sandy and Sunita and Pilar and the whole gang for inviting us. I have to say I'm going to give an overview, but the real experts come after me in the distinguished panel of speakers to follow. So if you're looking for the guts of what's really happening, that's who you should listen to. Let me give you an overview though. So we've just been through 4 years of cruelty and chaos brought to you by the Trump administration. They weaponized an already miserable and dysfunctional immigration system. And we have a president and a slight majority, a very slim majority in Congress of Democrats that have become more pro-immigrant. So what can we expect? I'd say the progressive pro-immigrant movement is aligning on 3 main goals. One is to undo the cruelty that has been put in place in recent years to stop the pain that has been inflicted on immigrants and refugees. Number 2 is to build back better, if you will, but to build something that has never existed in this country, really, which is a fair, humane, and functional immigration system. And then 3rd is to, and this may actually be the most difficult, is to pass transformative legislation that will put millions of undocumented immigrants on a path to citizenship. Let me briefly name check what the Biden administration has done in the first week, and then to just say a few words about why the Biden administration is doing this. So they've done 6 executive orders, 2 DHS memos to change policy, and they've introduced a sweeping legislative proposal. They've ended the Muslim and African bans. They've ordered the reinstatement of DACA for immigrant youth. They've ended border wall construction. They imposed a 100-day moratorium on most deportations, something that was stopped by a temporary restraining order in a Texas court with a Trumpy judge and a GOP attorney general in a dirty deal to try to thwart the Biden administration's most progressive move. They have begun the wind down of something called MPP, the Remain in Mexico program, where tens of thousands of people are stuck in Mexico being denied their legal right to apply for asylum. They've, in addition to the 100-day moratorium, they issued interim guidelines to restrict the number of people who are priority for arrest under the immigration priorities. They have extended something called DED, Deferred Enforced Departure, for a group of roughly 4,000 Liberians so that they can take advantage of a law that allows them to seek permanent status. And then finally, they have ended efforts by the Trump administration to take undocumented immigrants out of the census count for its use in devising congressional seats. The sweeping legislative proposal, it was centered on a path to citizenship for undocumented immigrants, but I'm hoping people like John Yang and others can talk about the features that haven't gotten as much attention: reduce family backlogs instead of reduce family immigration, invest in root cause alleviation in Central America, and a number of other features that haven't gotten as much attention. The obvious question that we've been getting from many is, how can you pass a sweeping immigration bill in a Senate that's 50-50 and with Republicans becoming the party of Trump? I think most of us are realistic that if there's a chance for a broad legalization bill, it may not be all 11 million, but it may be many millions of people, perhaps attached or included in a COVID or economic relief package, where they use a procedure in Congress called reconciliation, which is a budget rule that allows major bills to go through on 51 votes. I know many of my colleagues think, let's reach out to Republicans. Let's see if we can get 10 votes. Let's see if we can do it. I'm a bit more skeptical, having tried that many times in the past. I think the best way is to look for a way to position legalization attached to a package that can pass with 51 votes, meaning Democrats plus Vice President Kamala Harris. And then finally, just a note on why I think the Biden administration and President Biden and Kamala Harris are leaning into immigration, when just prior to Trump, the Obama administration seemed very hesitant about it, somewhat scared of leaning into the issue. And I don't think that's because Joe Biden is a radically different politician from Barack Obama. I think that the tectonic plates underlying the debate have shifted. I think the pro-immigrant movement has shifted the terms of debate. I want to name check my colleague Ravi Rabir, who's on the phone. What has been done on deportation and a push for a moratorium and for a reimagining how immigration rules are enforced has been done by activists around the country, and they deserve a whole lot of credit. Public opinion has shifted. Even though Trump demonized immigrants and made it his signature issue, public opinion has become more positive towards immigrants and towards immigration policy. Trump's nativism has backfired with the majority of Americans. This plays out politically. Democrats have traditionally been scared of the issue because Republicans have used attack ads to make it difficult for them to win in contested seats. In fact, what's happened is that Democrats are growing in confidence, and the wedge issue of immigration is losing its edge. And then finally, I think Biden and Harris have a good sense of how to find the sweet spot in the Democratic coalition that unites the progressive wing and the moderate wing for something they can all get behind. And that is the political skill being brought to a contentious issue so that at least the Democratic coalition can be on the front foot, lean into the issue, and look for ways to either work with Republicans or to work with Democrats only to try to get major legislation passed. Let me stop there and turn it back to Pilar or Sunita.
Okay, so so Araceli Martinez of La Opinion has an interesting question. Are people that have orders of deportation, current orders of deportation included in the proposal somehow? She has said that she'd met with immigrants who have deportation orders and are unclear as to where they fit into this picture.
Well, I may want to defer to an immigration attorney like Cyrus on this. My understanding is that because of the temporary restraining order, those who are no longer protected by the 100-day order are those who have orders of removal now. But Cyrus, can you help us out? You have to go off mute.
Cyrus, unmute.
Yeah, so even if there's a 100-day pause which has been blocked by the court has not blocked the new priorities that have been set forth in the Biden administration. And under those priorities, if you're not a threat to national security, you're not a criminal felon, aggravated felon, you could still try to claim that you're not a high priority and should not be deported, even if there is an outstanding removal order against you. I don't believe this court block applies to the new priorities that have been set forth.
But we understand there are 3 flights that left Louisiana today for Central America. So all the orders in the world don't change the culture and the nature of life. So let's not kid ourselves.
Absolutely. There are 2 questions on, what has shifted in the last couple of months? How has immigration become a priority when it was not?
Well, the factors I mentioned, I mean, the public is way out in front of the politicians on this one. Trump challenged the notion, the self-description of America as a welcoming country. They took a wrecking ball to the Statue of Liberty, to use a metaphor. And the surprising thing is a lot of voters in the middle who don't typically think very much about immigration were forced to think about it. They were forced to think about it when friends and community members were subject to deportation, when families were being separated, toddlers ripped away from their moms and dads at the border, when there were stories of people being denied the chance to even apply for asylum. And so what happened is that instead of going towards the Trumpian view, the Trump view excited the cul-de-sac of his base, but it actually backfired and created more strength with the majority of Americans. So if you look at the polling of all the things that Trump did and what Biden did, the majority is with what Biden did. So that's the wind at our backs, rather than maybe 10, 15 years ago, it felt like for politicians, the wind was at their face. I would add, though, that the organizing and advocacy of the immigrants' rights movement has really shifted the center of the debate and made what once seemed a little radical seem common sense. And so I think we have to give credit to the people who have been organizing from the ground up for the last 10, 20 years.
Absolutely. Pilar, did you want to ask a question before I send it over? Okay, all right. Thank you very much. Oh, Ravi.
Can I add a little bit to what Frank is saying?
Absolutely.
What had happened is, what I believe happened is when he got into power, the former president, everyone fell into the, felt uncertain about what was going to happen tomorrow. Citizens and non-citizens alike, but citizens now living similarly to non-citizens were looking for avenues to engage, to build relationship, to be able to create a better space. And they ended up in, the Floyd protest, the immigrant movement. So you had a lot more connection as a result of the trauma of living under a fascist president. And it became even more intense under the pandemic, where even citizens it became as intensified of not knowing what is happening tomorrow, especially with loss of jobs, loss of money, food. So it all ties in together, and it helped that citizen itself understood how others are living. Sunita?
Thank you, Ravi. We look forward to your comments further in the briefing. Our next speaker is John Yang. Mr. Yang.
Great, thank you very much, and good afternoon or good morning to everyone. My name is John Yang. I am the President and Executive Director of Asian Americans Advancing Justice, AAJC. We're a civil rights organization based in DC. We also have independent affiliates in San Francisco, Los Angeles, Atlanta, and Chicago. And I'm really excited to be talking to all of you about the US Citizenship Act and the initiatives by the Biden administration. And let me start by talking about why this is important to Asian Americans, because oftentimes when you talk about immigration, the story of Asian Americans isn't quite part of the narrative. And I want to make sure people understand why. So if you look at current immigration patterns, close to 40% of all immigrants coming to the United States today come from Asia. It is projected that by 2055, over 50%, the largest group of immigrants residing in the United States will be Asian Americans. So the importance of immigration policy is tremendous for not only Asian Americans, but Americans and American society as a whole. It's for that reason that Advancing Justice AAJC is excited, very excited by the pathways to citizenship offered by the US Citizenship Act. I liken it to the 1965 Immigration and Nationality Act. And I liken it to that because not only is it an immigration bill, but it really is a racial justice bill. Just like INA in 1965 was part of a whole series of civil rights legislation that passed in the 1960s, we can view the US Citizenship Act as part of this drive towards racial equity, racial justice by the Biden administration. And in that sense, we see how all of this factors as one. For the Asian American community, some other statistics to remember is that of that 11 million that Frank spoke of who are undocumented, approximately 1.7 million Asians are undocumented. We have probably around 120,000 people who are eligible for DACA. We have 15,000 Asians, specifically Nepalese, that qualify for TPS or temporary protected status. So all of these different policies that are captured by this legislation affect Asian Americans in a very dramatic and significant way. In particular, we are very thrilled that the US Citizenship Act includes the provisions from Representative Chu's Reuniting Families Act. Reuniting Families Act really focuses on family immigration, which is another cornerstone of Asian American immigration. In this past year and the last couple of years, approximately 70% of Asian Americans come to the United States through the family immigration provisions. And over 90% of our population right now are immigrants or the children of immigrants. So the inclusion of Representative Chu's Reuniting Families Act is a major victory for Asian American advocates who have fought for these provisions in certainly the last 4 years, but it even extends to before that. If you talk about 2013 immigration reform, 2000 immigration reform, and the need to protect families as part of the cornerstone of American immigration. Look, since the 1965 INA, the immigration system has centered around families, with the understanding that families help immigrants settle, they find jobs, they learn English, and they become part of our society. Immigrants in turn will take care of their children, bring other relatives that can help with their children, which in turn allows immigrants to find other jobs, build businesses, and really contribute to American society. So it's all part of this package. And it's also, I want to make sure that this dispels some of the myths around Asian American immigration. Although certainly many Asian Americans immigrate here under H-1B or high-tech or STEM visas, that's not the majority. That's only a small minority of Asian Americans that come to the United States. Rather, many Asian Americans that come to the United States are like all immigrants that we know and that we've historically have known. They come here to find a better life. They don't come here necessarily with political power, with wealth, with class, but they come here because they believe in American values. They want to contribute to that innovation and contribute to making the United States a better place. So let me be a little bit more specific about what the US Citizenship Act does, especially as it relates to families. So what it does is it adds green cards to clear the long backlogs that sometimes extend up to 20 years for certain countries in Asia. And it allows families to be reunited here, and it lifts the country caps, which is something that oftentimes we have talked about as a barrier to entry that creates these long lines. It adds green cards to clear the backlogs for employment-based visas. Because like I said, although employment-based visas are not the majority of Asian American immigration, it does provide a component. So it does help with the H-1B process and their families that are stuck in those perpetual temporary status. It also ensures that children do not fall out of status when they turn 21 and codifies work authorization for spouses on what are called H-4 visas. It also offers enforcement relief by eliminating the 3 and 10-year bars and providing family unity waivers so that mixed status families can finally sponsor their undocumented loved ones. And even some who have been deported can seek to be sponsored by family members. It promotes diversity by building upon Congress's desire to ensure that people from all countries have an opportunity to immigrate to the United States and expand the diversity visas. And this is something that I expect that Patrice from UndocuBlack will talk about as well. Importantly, it also provides a pathway for LGBTQ equality in our immigration laws by treating permanent partners as spouses, which is particularly important for the LGBT community because there are certain countries where same-sex marriages are still not allowed. It also provides protections for orphans, widows, children, and Filipino veterans who fought alongside Americans during World War II. It also allows immigrants with approved family sponsorship petitions to join the family here on a temporary basis while they wait for their green cards. So there's a lot in this bill that we are very excited about. It really modernizes our system and creates several different pathways and opportunities. It clears backlogs. It allows for families to stay united. When we talk about family separation, clearly we do need to talk about family separation at the border. But the other component of family separation is because of this legal immigration process where families are separated and not allowed to reunite in the United States because of these backlogs and the like. The other component of the US Citizenship Act that we should note is that it also includes Representative Chu's No Ban Act. So as you probably know, President Biden already rescinded the executive orders related to the Muslim ban and the African ban. But the reality is that another executive order by another president could institute those bans. So part of this legislation makes it that much harder for another president in a future administration to reinstitute these bans by a simple executive order. The last piece that I would mention is that another priority for the Asian American community is to obtain relief for about 15,000 Southeast Asian refugees with final orders of deportation. These are longtime permanent residents of the United States that got in trouble with the law when they were young and impoverished. They've served their time and they've been rehabilitated. Yet years later, our government, certainly during the last 4 years, have sought to deport them. And so we applaud the president's work here to sort of provide these temporary enforcement provisions and to prioritize people that prioritize certain people and really take a more careful look at who needs to be deported now, as opposed to sort of looking at that bigger picture to ensure that we have the right pathway. So we're certainly thankful for all of this that the Biden administration has done. We look forward to working with them to see these opportunities and use this bill to demonstrate that racial equity, that racial justice for all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John. I'm going to let Henrietta answer her question, ask her question herself. Henrietta.
Thanks so much, Sunita. Many groups in this country have a lot of anxieties and fears about the browning of America. And Frank talked about some of Trump's policies creating backfiring. And I'm wondering, with the opening up of the immigration laws that you just now described, wouldn't this create more anxieties and fears among those who support what Trump represented? And couldn't that cause a backlash eventually?
Mhm. Well, I think what Frank said initially about where public opinion is now should be recognized, which is the vast majority of Americans are comfortable with more expanded immigration. They believe in that inclusive America. So the starting point for all of us should be that America is still an inclusive America, and this fear of the browning of America does exist, but it is in a small segment of the American population. And then with that small segment, we must find a way to talk to them. Because the reality is, unless you are a Native American or you are an African American who had ancestors that were brought here forcibly as a slave, all of us are immigrants. And this is a common narrative that we have seen before, whether it is with Italians that came here, the Polish immigrants, or Irish immigrants during the potato famine. There's always this concern of the other that is coming here. America's always overcome it in the past, and we can overcome it here today.
John, thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to next turn the briefing over to Cyrus Mehta. Cyrus, welcome. Please unmute yourself.
Thank you very much. Hello, everybody, and thank you for having me today. I've been asked to speak about the employment and business immigration reform aspects under the Biden administration. I think both Frank and John after him have already outlined a lot of the issues. But with respect to legal immigration too, especially skilled immigrants, the current immigration law is woefully inadequate. There are inadequate green cards annually allotted to different employment-based categories, including skilled categories and investor categories. So, for example, if somebody's been sponsored on an H-1 visa and the employer then files a green card on behalf of a person born in India, it would take several decades before this person gets the green card. The immigration system is totally out of whack. If an employer has to wait like for decades before a skilled worker can get permanent residence, and this is all because of this person's country of birth. So Indians have been most impacted under the current employment-based categories, and people born in China are the second most impacted, both categories, and they're Asian immigrants. And John also mentioned that in the family categories, it may take 10, 20 years for brothers and sisters of US citizens and adult children of certain US citizens to immigrate. So it's ridiculous. That's not the way Congress intended it to be when the last reform with immigration numbers happened in the 1990 Act. They were thinking that, 2 and 3 year waits would be too long. But now we have waits that stretch into several decades. So what the Biden immigration proposal does, it has a lot of good things. It plans to eliminate visa backlogs, not by infusing more numbers, but by not counting many categories. So for example, family members, the derivative family members, if they're not counted, then that will actually increase the visas in each category every year, because the whole intention was to sponsor the skilled immigrant. But if that person has 4 or 5 family members, why should they be counted in the categories? So it explicitly eliminates the counting of family members. It also carves out other people like STEM degree holders, and it recaptures unused visas. That is also a shame, because every year the administration does not use up visa numbers, and that goes wasted. So this bill attempts to basically get more visas and reduce the backlogs. It also aims to prevent the aging out of children. That's been a tragedy, because even though there's been this focus on DACA children, there are children of legal immigrants who age out and then could fall out of status and be in jeopardy. So because their parents don't get the green card on the time, they waited more than a decade, and then their children turn 21, and now they have to fight their own way in the system. So from an H4 dependent visa, they're forced to switch to an F1 visa, very hard to get when you've already established immigrant intent. And so this bill also attempts to ameliorate the age out situation. It does have a lot of good things, and I really hope it gets passed. And as Frank said, if it can go through a reconciliation measure, that would be ideal. But in addition to this legislative proposal, I think it's been very exciting in the 10 days that Biden has taken over. So, for example, there were lots of midnight regulations that Trump issued that would impact H-1B workers by artificially increasing wages and the like. So there's a 60-day freeze memo that has actually delayed the implementation of 2 or 3 H-1B rules that would impact high-skilled people. And so that 60-day freeze gives the ability to issue more notice and comment, and to reconsider and give more time to litigate and challenge these rules as being ultra vires to the Immigration Act. Another great feature is that the Trump administration maliciously tried to rescind the ability of H-4 spouses to get work authorization, while the H-1B spouse was waiting for years in the backlogs, and these H-4 spouses, mainly women, who are also highly skilled and educated, but doing nothing and couldn't work. So this H-4 employment authorization was a great boon. Trump tried to take it away, didn't really succeed, but we just heard a day or two ago that that proposal of Trump to rescind the ability of H-4 spouses to work has been withdrawn. Then Trump also passed bans, and we've heard about the Muslim and African ban that have rescinded on the first day. But there was also the work visa ban and the immigrant visa ban. So these are people who were outside the United States on the day these executive orders were issued, or proclamations were issued by Trump last year, and under the guise to protect the American labor force from immigrants who posed a threat to the US labor market during COVID. And a lot of non-immigrants on H visas and L visas have been stranded abroad as a result of these proclamations. And a lot of would-be immigrants who were sponsored by family members have also been stranded abroad. And there has been litigation that has been partially successful, but it's very hard to challenge the president's use of Section 212A(f) to issue these bans. So we've just heard, as of yesterday and even today, that on Tuesday, the immigration day was going to be today, but I think they're waiting for Mayorkas to get confirmed on Monday evening. And then on Tuesday, we have heard that these 2 proclamations that ban would-be immigrants and non-immigrants might get rescinded by Biden. So even though the shelf life is till March 31st, because Trump deviously extended it on the last day of 2020 to March 31st, they're still causing a lot of hardship. Imagine if you were abroad, you have an H-1B visa, you can't fly back in. And so that will also be rescinded, hopefully. So I think overall, a combination of this legislative proposal, along with the possibility of even more executive actions, and there's a lot of creativity one can deploy in reinterpreting the statute under executive actions. And I'm heartened to know that some of the people on Biden's immigration policy council in the White House were originally there during the Obama time. We spoke to them, we gave them very creative ideas on how to, not count family members under the existing law and I'm hopeful that even if for some reason the proposals don't pass, we can still try to ameliorate the plight of millions of immigrants who are waiting in the backlogs through executive actions that will faithfully reinterpret the Immigration Act.
Thank
I
you
think
so
I'll
much,
pause
Cyrus.
here and take questions.
Yes, I'm going to ask a question on behalf of Michael Tucker. I'll summate his question. Could you discuss the per country caps? I think that is a little bit vague. Both you and John had mentioned that, and I believe that addresses Michael's question.
Yes, of course it is vague, and I guess you can only say so much in 5 minutes, but I'll explain it here in a nutshell. So within the quotas every year for each country, so each country is entitled to a certain percentage, and within that quota per country, so yes, so basically there's a per country limit within each category, within each employment and family category. And each country is only entitled to 7% of the overall quota. And when that gets hit, if you're born in that country and it's a high sending country, you're more impacted than, let's say, a person born in Lithuania. So if you're born in India, in the employment-based second preference or third preference, you're waiting several decades. If you were born in Lithuania or Switzerland, you can get your green card in a couple of years. So it creates a very unfair situation based on the country of birth. And this is kind of redolent of the national origin quota system that existed from 1924 till the 1965 Act. Now, the 1965 Act imposed these per country limits, but it was not the intention of the 1965 Act to create national origin quotas. But over the years, because of the fact that Congress has not expanded the quotas, it has kind of resulted in invidious national origin discrimination within the immigration system based on your country of birth. And the Biden bill proposes is to eliminate these per country limits because they cause a lot of mischief. They indirectly lead to discrimination over the years. And that is actually a very worthy objective.
Absolutely. I'm going to ask one more question on behalf of Juan Esparza, who asks, does the Biden immigration plan take future agricultural labor needs into account?
Yes, indeed. So there is something in the summary that says that it will improve access to green cards for workers in lower wage sectors. So I'm assuming that low wage sectors, so these are essential workers. I would not want to call them low wage workers, but they're really essential to the US economy. They run the restaurants, they run the meat factories. Without them, the farms don't, the crops will get rotten. So yes, I think we have to have a bill that will basically cater to the future flow of essential workers. So we don't then it doesn't result in undocumented immigrants, because part of the reason why we have undocumented immigrants is because the legal immigration system is woefully inadequate. It has been inadequate. It has not been able to update itself. And when people cannot immigrate legally, nobody wants to be out of status. I seldom meet a client saying, I love to be out of status. Everybody wants to get into status, but they can't because of the imperfections in the system, because of the inadequacy of the visa numbers. So yes, I think this bill will also provide for essential workers.
Cyrus, thank you so much for joining us today. I turn it over next to Patrice Lawrence of Undocu-Black. Patrice, are you with us?
I am. Hello, everyone.
Hello, welcome.
Hi. Hi, my name is Patrice Lawrence. I am co-director of the Undocu-Black Network, a multi-generational network of Black and undocumented folks all across the country. Thank you for joining today. I will start with probably my favorite declaration, which is the Liberian DED. So as was mentioned before, a little bit about it. So Liberians were able to get green cards during the Trump administration. It's not talked about very much, but I'm very, very proud of the fact that we were able to do that. It's a group of folks that are about 4,000, and it extends for both their children as well as their spouses. So the numbers are actually closer to 10,000, and I'm a little bit more confident saying that now than I did before. But what we saw with this bill was that these folks were not given approval of their green cards. And up until October of last year, just about 2,600 people had actually gotten a chance to apply because of the additional guidelines that were added to the application process. One of the rules that was particularly egregious and mirrors actually the new rule for the diversity visa is that folks had to have a valid unexpired passport. And this is difficult in a lot of countries around the world during normal times, but we can only imagine how difficult it is during the times of COVID. So we needed the Liberian DED, deferred enforced departure, to be extended so that folks would be able to access work permits and a stay of removal while they're able to apply for the program. And our hope is that we are able to bring up those numbers, and so that's really hopeful. I touched a little bit about diversity visa, and I know John mentioned it as well. So the diversity visa numbers in the Biden Day 1 bill, which has not yet been introduced in Congress, but we got the memo for. We're pleased that in it, it increases the diversity visas from 55,000 to 80,000. And this is important because, one, the diversity visa program is one of the programs that is normally axed out first when we're talking about building or changing immigration at all. In fact, it was a key one that was debated in 2018 after when we were talking about DACA and changing that. And the Congressional Black Caucus really stood up, and advocates like Ondaki Black and others stood up. Why? Because over 60% of the folks who get the diversity visa are from African countries. It is primarily one of the only ways that they are able to come to the United States. We anticipate that there will be a change to the current rule that was also instituted under Trump, which was a passport rule, similar to the passport rule that they put in the LRIF, that's the Liberian Green Card program. And based on our estimates, this would ban about 8 million people from applying for the diversity visa. The diversity visa does bring in about 11 million applications every year, even though only 55,000 people will be chosen. And of the 8 million that we expect to be barred, about 5 million of those are Africans. The next bit I'll talk about is TPS for Black countries, or TPS in general. So the Dream and Promise Act, of course, passed out of the House June 4th, 2019, another really landmark moment. But in that bill, it was for folks who would be DREAM eligible, of which quite a significant majority are minority, are Black immigrants from all across the world. And then the second section of that bill was specifically for TPS and for DED. For
Patrice, I'm so sorry, just a bit slower. Our
interpretation.
I'm terribly sorry to interrupt you.
So sorry.
No worries.
I was trying to meter myself. Okay, going. Okay, so the Dream and Promise Act, June 4th, 2019, Dreamers, TPS, DED. I think many folks are familiar with the first half of the bill because that's most common, because that was for folks who were children who migrated here. The second half of the bill is multi-ethnic, multiracial, and different ages, for sure, and quite a number. The majority of the actual countries are Black countries, but the numbers are mostly for Central America. So it included countries like Guinea and Sierra Leone and Liberia, Sudan, Somalia, South Sudan, Haiti. Haiti makes up a sizable population there. And so we do hope that in the package that we're working on as advocates, and that Congress is indicating that they are interested in taking up, they will pass this bill again, and we will actually get it passed into law. Currently, for temporary protected status, the countries that were involved with the lawsuits, their work permits and their stay of deportations is only valid until October 4th of this year. So we are hoping that that gets reinstated. And then there are a few other countries that really do need protection that we are hoping may be granted status. Just yesterday, we did have a redesignation and an extension of status for Syria. This is really important because when we talk about extension of temporary protected status, which is granted by DHS Secretary, that means only the people currently covered are able to access the status. But if we do redesignation and we change the date, then that means that new folks are also able to benefit. And that's what they did yesterday for Syria. And that's the first time that has been done in over 4 years. The last bit I'll mention is just for the Muslim and African ban. The Muslim ban, the third iteration of it, really brought in other countries, the majority of which were Black. So Nigeria, Tanzania was involved. Sudan and Eritrea were already in the first iteration. And so we're happy to see that rescinding, and also the promise of the Biden administration that they will expedite visa applications that are pending right away as well. There are other visa sanctions that we need to have overturned, and I believe John mentioned those, so I won't go over them, but we're looking forward to that. And then the actual last thing is about the moratorium. So earlier, the word aggravated felon was mentioned. I want to note that aggravated felon can mean someone who shoplifts. It can mean someone who committed check fraud, as was the case for one of Undocumented Black's members in 2018 who was deported. The word, the framing is very misleading. And so in the Biden bill, they do, the day one bill, it also mentions that it would change the definition of conviction and also the definition of aggravated felon. And that would be good because Black folks, as you know, are heavily policed. And so they get caught up in this. And with the resumption of deportation flights, the first one that we actually know of that took off yesterday went to Jamaica. So we're not sure the details of who was on that flight, but we do know that the other thing for the moratorium is that it does not apply to those who signed their own voluntary deportation. And we know that the tactics of ICE is to force people to do that. So we hope that within the 100 days and the review that they're doing, they will find what we as advocates have found, which is that ICE lies, and they use extreme coercion tactics to force people to sign for their own removal.
I'm going to just take one question from John Davis. John, are you muted so that you can unmuted so that you can ask your question?
Hi, thank you so much. Patrice, my name is John Davis. I'm with Our Weekly in Los Angeles. And I'd just like to ask you, I appreciate everything you've said, but why do you think the plight of African immigrants is underreported? And then what can Black journalists in the United States do to shed light on this very important topic?
Right, thank you for your question, John. I think one is just something that happens in general with racism is inherent bias. I think reporters are accustomed to painting immigrants as a certain type of people, and Black is not one of them. I think the second bit is trust. We have found sometimes that when we do tell our stories, that it is twisted and our words are twisted, and so folks don't feel safe enough to come forward. Groups like Undocumented Black are trying to change that, and really would encourage for reporters to reach out to us and to our affiliates and groups that we're associated with, One of the things that we actually do, which may sound, it's a soft skill, but it's a matter of actually training our members on how to talk to the media and making sure that we vet reporters as well. We do need these stories amplified, so I welcome that.
Thank you so much, Patrice. We next move on to Marielena Inakape. Marielena.
Thank you, Sunita, and thank you to Pilar and Sandy for the invitation. Wonderful to be with this great panelist that you have put together today. Marielena Inakape, I'm the Executive Director of the National Immigration and Law Center. And I'll start by saying that as an immigrant from Colombia, someone who grew up in a low-income immigrant family, and particularly given what we have been through as a community in the last 4 years, immigrant families, immigrant communities, and frankly, as a country, the last 4 years have felt like nothing less than a war on immigrant families and on our country and our democracy. And today, we are so hopeful, right? We really do believe that this is the beginning of a new era in our country. And it gives us great hope that the Biden-Harris administration has begun their administration from day one so strongly and unequivocally centering immigrants and seeing immigrants as a strength to our nation, and with a commitment to undoing the harm of the last 4 years and even before, as they also start and collectively together we build a 21st century immigration system that is truly grounded in racial, economic, and gender justice. As you've already heard from a number of speakers today, and so I think
Marielena, I'm so sorry, a little bit slower, please. The interpreters, yes, thank you.
Thank you. Forgot that you guys had translation and I tend to speak fast. So thank you for that, Sunita. So yes, since you've already heard from a number of speakers, today what I will be focusing on is the public charge rule. At the National Immigration Law Center, the last 4 years, we focused on 3 major priorities. One was the Muslim and African bans, which Patrice has already spoken to. I'll just say briefly that with the Muslim and African bans, today marks exactly 4 years ago, where we filed the first lawsuit on behalf of Mr. Darwish, who was an Iraqi refugee who filed the first lawsuit against the Trump administration. And that then began the process of the lawsuit that we filed along with other civil rights organizations like the ACLU and others, and successfully, up until a certain point, were able to block the Muslim ban. But the Supreme Court ultimately allowed that to stay on the books. On day one, as Patrice already has mentioned, the Biden administration did rescind the executive orders with respect to the Muslim and refugee and African bans, but we believe that we need to go further than that, and that the Biden administration will need to put in place the processes for families to be reunited. That was actually the first instance of family separation under the Trump years, was when families were blocked from being able to come together. Mr. Darwish, for example, who was that first courageous plaintiff that we represented on January 27th of 2017, came to the United States after having served as an interpreter in Iraq with the US military. And he arrived in the US after having gone through national security vetting. He arrived with his wife and his children, and they were separated at JFK Airport. Some of you will remember that because that was all over the news, and that is what prompted hundreds of thousands of people to go to the airport all over the country and all over the world, frankly, to stop the Muslim ban from going into effect. And so that reunification of families is central to our agenda at the National Immigration Law Center, along with our partners from the Muslim and Arab and South Asian communities. Second, with respect to DACA, which may or may have mentioned before, similar to the Muslim ban, we were ready for DACA. We knew from the Trump administration, actually from even before Trump ran for president, that he was planning to terminate and attack both the DACA program for immigrant youth, as well as the DAPA program for parents of US citizen children that had an initial, an announcement from the Obama administration. And so when Trump announced the termination of DACA, we had courageous DACA recipients ready to sue, and we were able to sue within 3 hours. Fast forward until today, we've been able to safeguard the DACA program because the courts have blocked Trump all the way up to the Supreme Court and back But yet we know that that is temporary, right? That legal limbo, that anxiety, the emotional and economic uncertainty that so many young immigrants have been living with, and their families, as well as their employers and their classmates, all of that needs to come to an end. Really, the Biden administration has already announced that they are planning to preserve and restore DACA, but we need permanent solution, right? That has to be done through Congress and by working with Congress to make sure that we can provide a path to citizenship and a fast track, right? A fast path to citizenship for not just immigrant youth and dreamers, but the temporary protected status communities that Patrice just spoke to. And then lastly, public charge. So public charge is the third major category for us at the National Immigration Law Center that we have focused on the last 4 years. And the reason for that is, as you may recall, this was actually Stephen Miller's #1 priority. It took him almost 4 years to actually put that in place. But public charge had a devastating impact from day one when it was first leaked, which I believe it was leaked intentionally back in 2017. That prompted us at the National Immigration Law Center to co-found the Protecting Immigrant Families campaign, which UndocuBlack is a part of. Patrice sits on the steering committee. And the Protecting Immigrant Families campaign is very excited that through our partnership with the Biden, both the Biden campaign and now the Biden administration, we have a commitment that next week, the Biden administration will be announcing the beginning of the process of undoing the public charge rule. And I say the beginning of the process because the Trump administration was very smart in the way that they went about changing this particular rule that actually has its roots in the Chinese Exclusion Act. It has been on the books since the 1880s, and yet it is the Trump administration that implemented it in a way meant very deliberately to slow down the demographic shift in our country, basically creating an immigrant wealth test that would deny people the ability to remain with their families. So again, family separation is a theme. And second, that it would, that if people received healthcare, nutrition, or housing assistance, among other programs, they could be denied a green card. And that fear, that confusion that immigrants have experienced over the last 4 years because of the public charge rule and the broader anti-immigrant agenda has meant that today, in the middle of a pandemic, people are afraid to seek COVID testing, COVID care, and the vaccine when that's available. And so the critical importance for the Biden administration to not only announce next week that they will be undoing the public charge rule, but to then launch a robust outreach and education campaign in partnership with community-based organizations, community health workers, and others who are trusted members of our communities to be able to help immigrant communities gain that trust back and be able to come forward and seek the healthcare that they need. And I'll close by saying that the public charge rule is a good example of where, for us at the National Immigration Law Center, we are deeply committed to the long-term legislative fixes that are needed, such as the path to citizenship, but that at the end of the day, what we need is a full inclusion of immigrants in the Biden administration's agenda, to make sure that inclusion and equity are at the core of how every department in the federal government, whether we are talking about the Department of Labor, the Health and Human Services, the COVID task force, the Department of Education, that every department is looking at how their policies impact immigrants in this country and how we can have a more inclusive and just society where all of us have the freedom to thrive. I'll give it back to you, Sunita.
Thank you so much. I'm going to let Pilar ask her question first. Pilar.
Hi, Marielena. How are you? Good to see you. Every time we come to this point where, we have immigration reform hopes, a number of things happen. The Democrats, for example, always cater to the Republicans. Oh, we need to get Republicans. So we're just going to tone down our aspirations. It doesn't sound like it is happening this time in this way. Is that your sense? And I know you are advising the administration. So is this a sign that we're going at it stronger than before?
Absolutely, Pilar. I think that's a really great question. And it shows a couple of things. One, it shows that a multicultural, multi-ethnic, multi-generational coalition delivered a historic victory to the Democrats, and they recognize that they have to do things differently. Second, it's a sign that our movement has grown strategically. It's grown in terms of numbers, and it's grown in terms of our sophistication and strategy. And so we also are very clear, including all the movement leaders here, that that is no longer acceptable, that for the Democratic Party that is now in control, for them to start from a place where they concede everything and start in the middle, that is not possible. That is like negotiations 101, right? Is like, no, you start with your vision of what you want. And then of course you have to negotiate and you have to concede on certain things. But this time we do believe that both the Biden administration and the Democrats are starting from a much stronger place. And then we also have bills that pass, right? We have the Dream and Promise Act, as Patrice mentioned, which passed the House of Representatives, which means that there's a quick delivery of there's a quick victory that could be delivered with a quick vote in the Senate before April so that that can become law. It doesn't have to wait for a large bill to pass altogether. That's the same thing on the Farm Worker Modernization Act. And then finally, and I heard, I think Sirius was talking about essential workers, right? We believe that essential workers must be recognized by policymakers and that that can be part of an economic recovery bill or the reconciliation package right now. And so, yes, I think we are in a different moment. The one thing that I will say, and this connects to public charge, is we haven't seen the language yet. And so the one place where it does give me some concern is that it does appear that for people who will be on that first 5-year period of provisional status, that temporary period of time, people may be denied access to the subsidies and tax credits under the Affordable Care Act, which is just, if that is true, if that ends up being in the final language, that is completely unacceptable that in the middle of a pandemic, we are once again going to deny immigrants who are going to be here with legal status. For 5 years, we're going to be denying them the ability to have access to healthcare. So that reminds me that there's still work to be done, right? And at the end of the day, it's why we at the National Immigration Law Center are so focused on changing the narrative about the fact that immigrants are essential. Like, we are essential to this nation, not because of our work, but because of our humanity and our dignity. And we need to change that to get to a place where every policymaker recognizes that everyone should have access to healthcare, regardless of immigration status.
Absolutely. Marielena, could you please talk about the 3-year citizenship plan that's been proposed for DACA recipients?
Yes. So what the bill that the Biden administration has sent into Congress includes a couple of different paths to citizenship. So one is a total of 8 years, so 5 years for anybody who came to the United States prior to January 1st of 2021. And they would be on this 5-year temporary period, then be eligible for a green card for 3 years before applying for citizenship. That alone already is the fastest path to citizenship in comparison to previous immigration reform bills. For immigrant youth and temporary protected status communities, because they have had work authorization up until now, they would actually be placed on an immediate path to citizenship, and they would have access to a green card. They would not be in a temporary status, right? They could just apply for a green card immediately and then apply for citizenship. And then that would be the same thing for farm workers. For immigrant youth, they will have to show that there's going to be an educational criteria, that they've been in school of some sort. We haven't seen the language yet. And then for farm workers, they will have to show that they worked as a farm worker in the past. There's no future requirement that they stay working as in the agricultural sector.
And I'm sorry, just a quick follow-up question. Will public charge figure into whether a DACA recipient gets that green card?
No. So public charge, again, because the administration is going to end that next week or begin the process of ending that, public charge will not be a factor. Now, the other thing is we're actually working with the administration and with Congress, again, similar to the Muslim and African bans, that it's not sufficient to rescind what Trump did. We actually believe there needs to be a legislative fix. And we're hoping that as part of the COVID relief package, we'll be able to have Senate and House leadership include a legislative fix on public charge, because again, we want to avoid future administrations to do the same thing. This is an immigrant wealth test. This was a very intentional way by the Trump administration to try to focus on immigration being limited to white and wealthy people.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Marielena. We very much welcome your comments. Next on is Ravi Ragbir, who is going to tell us his story of deportation.
Thank you, Sunita. Wow, you heard a lot of information here. I don't know how much more I can add, but let me just give you a little background. I'm fighting my own deportation since 2006. I'm a Trinidad immigrant, and I have a criminal conviction. But you heard, I want to come back to what Marielena said about how this immigration bill, this immigration policy is steeped in the Exclusionary Act, the Chinese Exclusionary Act, which means that it's extremely racist. So for me, from my personal view, no one should be deported because immigration is racist. And therefore, what I'm looking for is a total repeal of immigration policies. Now, I say that, so you can already know how far left you say. I'm actually falling off the flat earth that people talk about. I make bad jokes, people. So I am extremely left, but I want to share that what has happened since January 6th is extremely, extremely positive. The fact that they have immediately stopped the Muslim ban, the fact that they have immediately put into place all of these policies through executive order is a good sign that Pilar actually pointed to, that you'll always hear before in the past that the Democrats would hem and haw and hedge about what needs to happen. This is happening. So we are on a good footing. The proposed immigration bill is a good sign. Immediately, Obama took a year and more to submit something. So I am optimistic. Again, although I believe immigration itself is racist, I compare it to the Fugitive Slave Act. I am extremely optimistic that we will have millions of people and millions of families. So I want to also talk about what Frank said, Frank Sherry, right? Where he talked about 3 planes leaving Louisiana, 3 planes leaving to deport people yesterday or today, I'm not sure. The information is so sparse, which even with an administration that says that we should stop deportation until we review what is happening, you have an agency that has unchecked powers, unchecked authority. They are called a plenary agency. A plenary agency basically means Congress has no authority over them, and you've heard them challenge any deportation in court because the court themselves said that they don't have authority over them. So they can do whatever they want to, and you're seeing that even today. In the past, as soon as the former president took power, immediately what they did is they ran a campaign of terror. To terrorize people, to terrorize our immigrant communities, to terrorize family. The goal was that people will be so afraid that they will leave. So in the last 4 years, they would ask people to bring their passports and their tickets to be deported. You had to self-deport because this administration was terrorizing you. And you saw the impact of that because when they took away TPS, before it was even challenged in the courts, because it was even challenged on the ground, the immigrant community was fleeing to go to Canada, especially the Haitians and the Africans, because they knew, as Patrice said, that they are normally the target of any terror campaign from any administration. They knew they were going to be the low-hanging fruit, and they were immediately going to be picked up and be deported. So they were fleeing under some extreme conditions, but people lost fingers because they were in the snowstorms, etc. So they ran this a campaign of terror, but they also, even though they're a plenary agency, they don't like to be criticized. They don't like to be talked about. They don't like people talking about it. So there's another campaign to target immigrant leaders, advocates like myself. And in 2008, they shackled me and took me away. And they wanted to be very public. They wanted it to be public, and they knew it was going to be public because in line with their psychological warfare and the act of terror, if Ravi, who had so many people who support him, could be deported, the person who the delivery worker who was picked up, what chance does he have, right? So it's a terror. And they were happy to do that. Fortunately, we won. I mean, I didn't win my case. I'm still fighting my deportation, but we show people that they can fight and it could be stopped. But I don't want to point, I don't only want to talk about me as being an immigrant leader. I'm going to share a screen. I'm going to share my screen because right after we started to look into all the other leader activists, all the organizers, all the people who were going to be targeted by immigration and custom enforcement. You know, they surveilled me, right? They followed me. The immigration director, ICE director said, he knows I bebopped, how I walk, the hat on my head. He knows where I live. I mean, this guy seriously followed me everywhere, surrounded my home and my job, because that's how intent they were on getting rid of leaders. So let me just share the screen here, and I'll put the link on the chat so you all can look at it. What you are seeing here is a map of all immigrant activist leaders who were targeted by immigration. We have over 1,000 people who we have identified who has faced this. If you click on the buttons, you will see that there's a lot more information that comes up that highlights people's stories. Those who want to be public you will get their information here. You will see the different categories of people who, or based upon what they were targeted, and the different agencies that are doing that. Let me just stop the share. I'm going to be putting it on the chat right now for you, everyone to have the link for that. So what we have seen is that this agency is a rogue agency, as many have said. And what we need to do, even now, as you see, you know, they issued a TRO, temporary restraining order, right? The temporary restraining order to stop somebody from doing something that they shouldn't be doing. It's kind of a ridiculous idea. And normally you would have seen that the TRO would not have mattered because this agency would have easily slowed down based upon the priorities. Instead, we have seen 3 flights leaving. And that should not have been happening. What we need to do, and I want to say this to all the ethnic media here, no one should be deported, especially now under this administration. What you need to do is, if you have these information, you need to reach out to the community leaders. You need to reach out to me. You need to reach out to Marielena and identify these people who are facing this deportation so that we can act to stop their deportation. We cannot respond unless we know who is facing that deportation. We are working on a case called Javier Maradriga. I'm sorry, I'm butchering his name. Right? He's DACA eligible. They took him. He was supposed to be on a flight last week. They brought him back to New York. They're flying him back down there. It's you know how that destroys his mental capacity, right? So that destroys him, right? It destroys his family emotionally, and that is what this agency is all about. So there's a lot more about. I also wanted to mention, and I'll probably end here. The reason why I'm also optimistic is they ended MPP. We thought they would have ended that months away because of the large people who are waiting on the border, 60,000 people waiting on the border. Now, most people think 60,000 people of Central American background, but there's a huge community from India, Bangladesh. There's a huge African population at the border. There's a huge Haitian population at the border. There is Cubans at the border. And you don't talk, John, we don't talk about that because people are not aware of that. And if you look at what was happening on the border, you will see that there was a racist list at the border to allow only certain people to come in, ignoring the Black community who also wanted to enter the US. I actually think we are on a good position. I think we with Marielena leading the charge and Frank and Marielena leading the charge, we have come to a good position. I applaud them for being there and for stepping up and creating some new and creative ways. And we need to hold this administration feet to the fire to continue doing what they're doing, even as I push for no one for deportation. Thank you, Sunita.
On that very optimistic note, I believe we will end our call today. Thank you all so much for joining us. Tremendous speakers, and happy reporting. Take care.
Thank you, Sunita.
Thank you.